to another episode of THV Tutorials. I am Seth Janiniku, your host, and in today's episode, we will continue with a breakdown of the ISO 9001-2015 in international standard. Right, that's on what quality management systems and their requirements. Right. So in today's episode, we're going to continue with a breakdown, and we're going to break down clause 8 in this video. Now, before we get down to business, you should know that clause 8 is the longest clause in the standard, and it's quite dense. And as such, in this episode, we will be, I will try my best as much to not be so verbatim as I usually am, and simply give you the runaround. Try to explain what each of the surpluses under operation is requiring the organization to do. Also, the relevance of stuff, how you can, tips and tricks for you to go about, remembering what these courses are about. Good. So before we get on to business, let's look at what the 8th clause in the standard entails. So, as I said, this is the longest standard, and there are 7 sub clauses under this clause 8. I mean clause, not standard, right? Standard is a collection of clauses in this sense. So 8.1 is our operational planning and control. Then 8.2 is the requirements for products and services. 8.3 is our design and development of products and services. Then we move to 8.4, which talks about control of externally provided processes, products and services, right? So speaking to that, that's how you control outsource products and services to make sure that they meet the requirements of your QMS. Moving on from there, we'll go to 8.5, that's production and service provision. Then move on to 8.6, that's release of products and services. And 8.7 is control of non-conforming outputs. So this will be the content of our video. If you haven't already subscribed to our channel, be sure to do so. Our statistics reveal that most of our viewers are unsubscribed. If these videos are proving to be helpful to you in your academic journey, kindly show some love and give us the support we need to keep dropping more episodes like this. Right, so before we get on to business, let's have our intro. Right, so let's get right into clause 8. Right, so operations, right? Operations here. So the first clause is operational planning and control. So first of all, when you hear that operational planning and control, what comes to mind, right? So there are 2 words here. You have planning and then you have control. From our time studying management, we know 2 things. First of all, planning is looking forward, right? You making plans, making arrangements as to how you achieve your goals. In this context, how the organization plans to achieve their goals. That's what is being required of them, right? Now, control is simply speaking to you putting steps in place to ensure that your plan follows through, right? So that as when you are implementing your plan, you make sure that you are going according to the path you set, right? So that's the 2 main things about it. Now you have what? Operational. Operation is simply what? The day-to-day activities, right? Now these are the activities that lead to the creation of products or that lead to the rendering of services, right? So the operation is very what? Day-to-day activities. So if you put all this together, clause 8.1 is speaking about the organization planning their operations and putting controls into place. So how do they do this? Now the standard said that the organization shall remember always where you have the shall is where the keyword is where the requirement is, right? So the organization shall do 3 things. They are planning, they are implementing, and they are controlling processes which they need to meet the requirements for the provision of their products and services, and to implement the actions determined in clause 6 by doing the following. That's A to E. Good. So a quick gist of clause 2. That was what? Normative references. Now, when you say normative reference, a normative reference is simply an essential document which is needed in order for you to implement or understand a clause. So, what this means is that in 8.1, clause 6 and subclause 4.4 are essential for you to understand and also what implement clause 8.1. Meaning that without 4.4 and clause 6, you cannot implement clause 8.1. That's basically what a normative reference is. Moving on. So 4.4 talks about the QMS and its processes. Then clause 6 is about planning. Under 6.1, we had actions to address risks and opportunities. So this is telling us out. First of all, when you talk about operational planning and control, the organization is being required by the ISO 2015 and ISO 9001 2015 to do two things. The first thing is what they are required to plan, implement, and control processes that they need to meet the requirements for the provision of products and services. That's one. And the second thing is to implement the actions determined in clause 6. Those that refers to the actions to address risks and opportunities. Excellent. And this is how they do it. So they do that by determining the requirements for the products and services, right? By establishing criteria for the processes and acceptance of products and services. And C says determining the resources needed to achieve conformity to the product and service requirements. D says implementing control of processes in accordance with the criteria. E, determining and keeping documented information to the extent necessary. Right. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, I won't be going over everything. I don't really want to be reading all these things. The give and take of this is that in order for the organization to do what they are required under clause 8.1, which is to one, plan, implement and control processes that they need to meet the requirements of the provision of their product and services, and also to implement the actions they determine in clause 6. They have to do the following things, right? So you can ask under clause 8.1, what are the things, or how can or how should an organization plan, implement and control the processes that they need for their processes, the processes they need to meet the requirements for the provision of their products and services, right? Or if an organization intends to implement the actions undertaken in clauses, what are 3 ways they can do that? So you can then come and say that under clause 8.1, the organization is required to determine the requirements for the products and services. They are also required to establish a criteria for the processes and for the acceptance of products and services. Good. Now C, determining. So basically speaking, you need to just go through this and understand what 8.1 is talking about, and understand that out of 8.1, this is what the clause is saying. Right? This is the message. This is the requirement of the organization. Good. Now by the note, and the note is always defining something in the clause. So where do you have to keep it? So E, determining and keeping documented information to the extent necessary. So note here is saying that keeping implies both the maintaining of documented information, right? And the output of this planning shall be suitable for the organization's operations. The organization, so when you see shall, it's a requirement. Now saying shall over here. So the operational planning that I want to do, the end result should be or is required to be suitable for the organization's operations. That's one thing, and that was 8.1. Another thing is the organization shall control planning changes and review the consequences of unintended changes, taking action to mitigate any adverse effects as necessary. So this is speaking to the subclause 6.3. That's what planning of changes to the QMS in this process, right? So this is saying that you should follow 6.3, because 6.3 cautions or requires the organization to make changes in a planned manner, taking into consideration certain things like the integrity of the QMS, allocation of resources, availability of resources, and so on and so forth. Right, good. So this is basically the planning and controlling aspect of the operation. Good. Now the last thing here says what the organization shall. Oh, apologies. I just realized that you couldn't say that. So the organization shall ensure that the outsourced processes are controlled. Right. That's what now it says here both out C clause 8.4. If you recall, when I was reading the outline of 8.1, I talked about control of externally provided processes, products, and services. So we'll get there, right? Basically speaking. Good. Moving on. 8.2. Well, I feel like I should go over this, right? So it's about a few sentences about keeping and how the note over here explains what keeping means. Right? Saying that keeping applies both implies both the maintaining and retaining of documented information. Excellent. I also skipped something right. Now, what do you mean by maintaining and retaining? What's the difference between maintaining and retaining something? This is my take on this issue. When you say I'm maintaining something, you are keeping it in its original form. For instance, should I gift you a phone? Right? This is my phone. Right? Should I gift you this phone? This year is 2015, right? You are in May. So I give this phone. If you maintain this phone, you mean that if I should come back in less than 6 months' time, this phone is in the state I give it to you in, right? You have maintained it, the screen isn't cracked, everything is working fine, nothing is destroyed on the phone, it's maintained, right? But whereas retaining simply means that you are keeping the phone. That's my take on it, right? You are keeping the phone. So I can come back 6 months later, and maybe the screen is broken, the battery is damaged. You have kept the phone isn't missing, you have kept it. But you have not maintained it. So my take on it is that maintaining has to do with you preserving the original state of something, right? Keeping it as it came to you. And retaining is simply a matter of you not losing it, you keeping it around. Right, good. So moving on. That's that. Moving on to 8.2. Right. So now basically speaking, 8.1 has required the organization to do what it has to do, right? And their operational planning and control, right? So now they have their plan and they know how to control their plan. Now 8.2 says now begin the work. In the first analysis, what you have to take care of what the requirements of your product and services. So the product and services that you are going to offer to your customers. What are the requirements? What do they need? Let's break that down. So for the get-go, you see that 8.2 has 4 further subclasses, and this comes in the form of what? Customer communication. We have determining requirements related to product and services. Then we have the review of requirements related to product and services. Then we come down. This is 8.4. That's what changes the requirements of product and services. So let's have a look at each of these things and the conclusion that you have. So 8.2. Well, actually 8.2.1. That deals with customer communication. Now this says that the communication with customers shall include A. Providing information related to product and services. B. Handling inquiries, contracts or orders, including changes. C. Obtaining customer feedback relating to product and services, including customer complaints. We have D. Handling or controlling customer property. E. Establishing specific requirements for contingency and actions when relevant. So this 8.2.1 is simply detailing what the communication of an organization with its customer looks like, right? So when you say you're communicating with your customer or your customers, it comes in the form of these five things mentioned, right? So whether it could be you are providing information about your product and your services, maybe you are handling inquiries, contracts or orders, right, including changes. Maybe you are establishing specific requirements for contingency actions when relevant. Right? These are the various forms through which communication with your customers can come in. That is all 8.1, 8.2.1 is talking about. So even if you notice, you know that it's not necessarily a requirement. Well, I guess you could say it's a requirement because it is restricting you to, as to how you are to communicate with your customers. Good, right? You realize here that it didn't say that customer communication is you vibing your customers and taking their number and giving them love messages. I love you, honey, coach. No, it's not that. Right? So it's being direct, it's being formal, it's being eloquent as to what it expects the nature of communication of an organization should be between they and their customers. That's what 8.2.1 is talking about. Now when you move on, go to 8.2.2, and that says what? Determining, this right, good. Determining the requirements related to products and services, right? Good. So now they have to what? Determine what they will need in relation to their products and services. And I said that when determining the requirements for products and services to be offered to the customers, right? The organization shall ensure that A, the requirements for the product and services are defined. So first of all, you have to define those requirements, and the definition of the requirements related to your product and services that you want to offer to your customers must include one, any applicable statutory and legal and regulatory requirements, which beforehand we have already discovered that what anytime you see statutory and regulatory requirements, it means legal. So first of all, you have to define as part of the requirement any legal requirements, right? Two, any other requirements that the organization considers to be necessary, they must define. B, the organization can meet the claims for the products and services it offers. So if you say I want to give somebody a mobile phone, and that mobile phone battery can last for 20 years, make sure that it is within the power or ability, should I say the capability of the company to deliver that promise. So whatever requirements and whatever claims you have made about your product or services, you should be able to meet it, right? Because that, if you ask me why, then I ask you to review the definition of quality. And we said that quality means what? Meeting and exceeding customer requirements, right? So if you are lost about the definition of quality, you should revisit our introductory video on the breakdown of ISO 9001 2015. When I did with the boys, we had a class. Let's move on. So that's, when they are, so 8.2.2 said out, when they are determining the requirements related to their product and services, these are the things that the organization must do, right? This means they must ensure that what the requirements of the product and services are defined, including what legal requirements and any other requirement that they think is necessary or they consider to be necessary. And then this is what the organization can meet the claims for the product and services they are offering, right? If you say your product can do A, you should do A. Excellent. The next thing we have here is clause 8.2.3, and that's what review of required requirements related to the product and services. So as we discussed before in this 8.2.2, we said that they have to determine the requirements related to their product and services, right? And those related requirements were what? Legal requirements, the necessary requirements deemed necessary by the organization, and what? Making sure that they can meet their claims. Fine. Now they have to review the requirements. So those legal requirements and those ones that they said were necessary, right, and the claims they made about their products, their ability to meet those claims, they have to review it. That's 8.2.3. And this is and 8.2.3 is about to tell us how the organization should review these requirements which are related to their product and services. So 8.2.3.1 here says that the organization shall ensure that it has the ability to meet the requirements for products and services to be offered to the customer. So full stop, that's the first thing. So from the bat you realize out the first sentence here is a reiteration of the B of 8.2.2, saying that what? Make sure that you can meet your claims. Saying that make sure that you have the ability, you have that strength, you have the capacity, you have the dream to what? Meet the requirements of your product and services. Good. The next one says that the organization shall conduct a review, a review before committing to supply product and services to a customer to include. So basically, before you move on to source your product and bring in your suppliers into your business, you must ensure that you must conduct a review, and this review that you are conducting must include these following things: A to E, right? So we have the requirements are specified by the customer, including requirements for delivery and post-delivery activities. Now, post-delivery activities is handled in clause 8.5, I think 0.5. So when we get there, we'll touch on that. The requirements not stated by the customer but necessary for the specified or intended use when known, right? So that's saying that not just those explicit requirements made by the customer, but also you must review the requirements which are implied by the explicit requirements. So the implicit requirements as well. And then you have requirements specified by the organization, legal requirements applicable to the product and service, right? So any law that's applicable to your product and service, you have to include it in your review before you go and do your source, before you go and source your product and start selling. Contract or other requirements different from those previously expressed, right? So if anything is accrued, have to deal with that. Now the organization shall ensure that contract or other requirements different from those defined are resolved, right? So if some of the requirements change, they have to, that's pertaining to what? Contract or other requirements, right? The contract that they will make or sign, or the others that they will make, any changes in that have to be resolved. Now the customer's requirements shall be confirmed by the organization before acceptance when the customer does not provide a documented statement of their requirements, right? So the customer's requirements shall be confirmed by the organization before acceptance, right? So before you as an organization, before you accept the customer's requirements, that with the customer's order, the customer's specifications, you must first confirm them, right? Now when the customer does not provide a documented statement of their requirements, so you must confirm the requirements of the customer when they don't provide a documented statement of said requirements. Note, in some situations, such as internet sales, a formal review is impractical for each other. Instead, the review can cover relevant product information, such as catalogs or advertising material. Like this is pretty self-explanatory, and if you don't understand it, let me know in the comment section. But most importantly, you must keep it in your knowledge, because one day they will come knocking. 8.2.3.2, right? The organization shall retain documented information as applicable: A, on the results of the review; B, on any new requirements for products and services, right? So what are we saying here? As an organization, you are required under 8.2.3.2 to retain documented information. on the results of the review you have conducted in 8.2.3.1. That's the first thing. And also on any new requirements for product design. So if any new requirements come, whether they are legal, whether they are for the customer, whether the organization now says it's necessary, they must what document those requirements. Now 8.2.4 says that changes to requirements for product and services. Now the organization shall ensure that relevant documented information is amended and that relevant persons are made aware of the change requirements when the requirements for product and services are changed. What is it saying? The organization is required to make sure that any important documented information is amended. Is amended, and that the relevant persons are made aware of the change requirement. So anyone who that requirement pertains to must be made aware of the changes to that requirement when those changes are made. Right. So before up next we have 8.3. But before we get on to that, let's have our break and then get on to it. Alright, guys, so 8.3, that talks about what? The design and development of products and services, right? So 8.1 says what? Operational planning and control. We've done that. Now we have dealt with the requirements of our products and services. Now what do? We design and develop those products and services. Basically, that's what I'm about to do. Now, 8.3 also has its own subclasses. We have 8.3.1, 8.3.2, we have 8.3.3. Then there's 0.4, then you have 0.5, right? And then we have 8.3.6. Oh God, look at our end. Yeah, it has, yeah, 8.4 is ended. So let's do it one subcourse at a time, and we shall finish. So worry not. These two shall pass, right? 8.3.1. That's what general. The organization shall ensure that what the subsequent provision of products and services is appropriate. And how do they do this? By what? Establishing, implementing, and what? Maintaining a design and development process, right? So basically speaking, they have to make sure that what? They have a design and development process for those products and services in order to make sure that what? There is subsequent provision for them. That's the general crossover that say what. So 8.3 is saying that in general, as an organization, you are required to ensure that there is subsequent provision of products and services. Good. How are you going to do that? I want to do that by what? Establishing, implementing, and maintaining a design and development process, which is what? Appropriate. Good. So 8.3.2, right? Design and development planning, right? So now you already know the general requirement. Now saying that they must have a design and development process which is appropriate. We are done with that. Moving on. So now so that when the organization is determining the stages and controls for the design and development. So for me, when I say design and development, it means what? When I say D&D, I'm referring to design and development, right? So when we are determining the stages and controls, the organization shall consider the following. So from A here to F, you can state in your copy down. These are the requirements, or these are the considerations that the organization is required to make when they are determining the stages and controls for D&D. Good. A. The nature, duration, and complexity of the D&D activities. The required process stages, including what? Applicable design and development reviews. The required D&D verification and validation activities. The responsibilities and authorities involved in design D&D processes. So basically, you should know 5 of these things. And you realize that some of them make it a bit easy for you to remember. C1 period, you have required. Most important, what you notice is what? So these are the key things that you should remember. So something like, hold on. Something like development and validation activities, responsibilities and authorities, right? Nature, duration, and complexity. So required process stages. This can be a bit tricky. So let's look for easier ones. Here we have internal and external resources. So this is a bit long. This requirements for subsequent provision. So that's, I think, it's easy to remember. How many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's look for the contingency. Documented information. If you guys notice, there are certain things that keep recurring. Something like documented information. So that can help you, when you are stating certain things. Of course, many understand that. Right? Under competence, I think that was 7.2. The organization is required to provide documentation as evidence. So that's something that you can use repeatedly to kill multiple birds. Moving on, 8.3, right? Design and development inputs, right? So now we have our design and development planning for our processes that we use to provide our product and services. Now moving on, we now have to deal with what? The inputs, right? What goes into the process, right? Remember, this is a process-based approach that I'm using here. So that what inputs, value-adding activities, which then give us our output. So at this stage, we're looking at the inputs that you put into our operations to get our product and services. So under 8.3.3, the organization shall determine the requirements essential for the specific types of products and services to be developed. Right? So they shall determine the requirements essential for the specific types of product and services that they are going to design and develop. Right? Excuse me there. So the organization shall consider these things from so A, B, C, D, E, right? So these are the things that they have to consider in determining the inputs necessary for the specific types of product and services that they are going to design and develop. So A, you have functional and performance requirements. You have information derived from previous similar design and development. D&D activities, legal requirements. So if you are focusing on legal requirements, it keeps recurring, right? So legal requirements. So put that down somewhere. Standards or codes of practice that the organization has committed to implement. Potential consequences of failure due to the nature of the product and services. Now, inputs shall be adequate for design and development purposes, complete and unambiguous. Right now, conflicting design and development inputs shall be shall. So these, so A to E that I just spoke about. Oh, I'm trying again. So sorry, guys. So A to E that just about. Those are the items that the organization shall consider when they are determining the requirements or the inputs necessary for the specific types of products, right? So from A to E that I just mentioned. I apologize for, I got a bit sidetracked and I forgot to show you guys the screen. So sorry. Right. So inputs and conflicting design. So basically speaking, after they make these considerations, now the inputs, right, those requirements need to be or are required by the clause to be adequate for the purposes of D&D, right? They have to be complete and certain. That's what they mean by unambiguous, right? They have to be concrete, certain. If it's 5,000 materials, you need 5,000 materials, have 5,000 materials. It shouldn't be around 4,000, it should be 5,000. It should be concrete, unambiguous, right? Now, conflicting design and development inputs shall be resolved, right? So if there's a conflict somewhere, maybe you need one thing for two products, well, find a way to resolve it, right? Maybe conflict, right? Good. And so the organization is required to what? Retain documented information on the D&D inputs, right? So those inputs, they have to document information about it and keep them in their records. 8.3.4, moving on, now it's talking about design and development controls, right? So now the organization shall apply controls to the design and development processes to ensure that so basically speaking, 8.3.4 requires the organization to what? Implement controls, right? Or apply controls to their design and development processes. If already explained out, control makes sure that you are going according to plan so that you don't deviate. So now 8.3.4 is saying out. First of all, the organization is required to put those controls in place, and also is now telling us or explaining why those controls have to be put in place through what? A to F. A to F, right? So they have to put their controls in place to ensure that the results to be achieved are defined, to ensure reviews are conducted to evaluate the ability of the results of design and development to meet requirements. So the results of the processes in D&D, can they meet the requirements that have been defined? To ensure verification activities are conducted to ensure that the D&D output meets the input requirements. See, so output is like a product or a service that they come up with in the end. Validation activities are conducted to ensure that resulting products and services meet the requirements for specified application for intended use. Any necessary actions on problems determined during the reviews or verification and validation activities. So again, we have here documented information is retained. So this can be a secret weapon for you. And always keep dropping it to add out your points. But I noticed something that I want to point out to you guys. Sorry, I only know. What do you see over here? This is design and development what? Planning. Right. So if you check the controls, right, then you have the planning. See over here, verification and validation activities, responsibilities and authorities, internal and external. What else do you have here? Control. See, what I'm arriving at is that planning is looking for it, control is looking back. If you can remember the considerations under planning, this A to H, that's no idea. If you can remember these things, right? And maybe you are caught, you can't remember stuff, You just need to play smart. And remember, some of these controls are just a restatement of the planning consideration. And just that to ensure, right? So for instance, A, the results to be achieved are defined. What can it compare that to? No. Facilities, can we give a requirement. Or it's similar to the age, right? To shall consider the requirement for subsequent provision of product and services. So you can say that it's similar to the age, but it's a bit vague. So that's how so anyways, reviews are conducted to evaluate the ability of the results of D&D to meet requirements. Also very similar. Anyways, it turns out that it's only the C and then the D. The C and the D are basically it, and then with the F. Well, thought we had solid code there, but it's just a little bit. But I hope that helps. Moving on, see, but in exams, never leave it blank. Never leave it blank. So if you can remember the planning, just turn them around and do what to ensure that and all shall be well with that. Okay, in the name of Jesus. Amen. So see. 8.3. No. Well, so for the controls, here you have a note. D&D reviews here, verification and validation have distinct purposes. They can be conducted separately or in any combination as is suitable for the product and services. Verification, validation, reviews all have distinct purposes under what D&D. So you can an organization can choose to do them separately, or they can do them in any combination that is suitable to their products and services. That's that. The next one here I have is 8.3.5, and 8.3.5 is talking about design and development outputs, right? We just talk about the inputs. I think two sub clauses, but now we're on the output. The organization shall ensure that design and development of outputs A meet the requirements, B are adequate, meet the input requirements, B are adequate for the subsequent processes for the provision of product services, C include or reference monitoring and measuring requirements as appropriate and acceptance criteria. That's referring to, I believe that's clause 7.1.5. Yes. Let me make a quick reference. Yes. I think 7.1.5. That's monitoring and measuring resources. Check out clause 7 for clarification. Good. So these are the requirements of the outputs of D&D, and they have to meet the input requirements. They have to be adequate for the subsequent processes for the provision of product and services, right? And C, you have to include or reference the measuring requirements and standards used. And D, specify the characteristics of the product and services that are essential for their intended purpose and their safe and proper provision, right? The organization shall again retain documented information on design and development output. My people, I hope you are paying attention. This is solid code. this is the same point being repeated what? Maybe the third time or so. If not the case, we must, shine our eyes. So be noting this. It's very, it keeps recurring. It could help. 8.3.6 Design and development changes. So from the get-go, you can just tell that this is showing the organization how they can make changes to what design and development. So the organization shall identify, review, and control changes made during or subsequent to the design and development of product and services to the extent necessary to ensure that there is no adverse impact on conformity to requirements. Basically speaking, they are to review and control changes in order to make sure that the end result conforms to the requirements. Right. Now the organization shall retain documented information on the following. Right. Design and development changes, the result of reviews, the authorization of the changes, and the actions taken to prevent adverse impact. Good. So we are now on clause 8.4. We'll get to that after a quick break. 8.4, this talks about control of externally provided processes, products, and services. Alright, so under this, you have one subproduct general, then you have what? Type and extent of control. Then that goes on, to the what? From there you go to information for external providers. Yeah, so there are three subclasses under 8.4. Let's break it down. So under the general, 8.4.1, general said what? Now the organization shall or is required to ensure that externally provided products, processes, and services conform to requirements, right? Basically speaking. First of all, make sure that all those processes, products, and services which are externally provided are conforming towards the requirements. These requirements are the same ones that you determine in 8.2. 8.4.2. No, sorry. Now still on 8.4.1. Now the organization is also required to determine the controls to be applied to externally provided processes. Right. So basically this is said out. Organization, you are required to make sure that those processes, products, and services that is being provided to you externally conform to the requirements. Now, it's also saying out not just that, but you also to make sure, or you also to put controls in place to ensure that those requirements meet, those product services and processes meet those requirements, right? So the organization is required to determine the controls to be applied when to the product, services, and processes when the products and services from external providers are intended for incorporation into the organization's own product and services. So those product, services, and processes that they are providing to you, you are going to incorporate them into your own products and services. So determine the controls to those provisions. B. The product and services are provided directly to the customers by external providers on behalf of the organization. So if those external provisions are going directly to the customer, the organization is required to determine controls to be applied to those provisions. C says what? Now, when a process or a part of a process is provided by an external provider as a result of a decision made by the organization, so as and when they decide to outsource one of their processes or part of their processes, they have to determine controls for that provision of processes by the external party. So these are the instances as and when the organization is required to determine controls toward externally provided product services and processes. Excellent. Moving on, it says what? The organization shall again determine and apply criteria for evaluation, selection, monitoring of performance, and evaluation of external providers based on their ability to provide processes, products, and services in accordance with the requirements. The organization again shall retain documented information of these activities and any necessary actions arising from their evaluation. Right? So basically speaking, yes, they have to determine the controls, and they also have to what? Determine. So they determine the controls by determining and applying what? A criteria which will be used to what? Evaluate, select, monitor performance, and reevaluate these external providers. And also they are required to what? To retain documented information. So moving on, go to 8.4.2, that's what? Type and extent of control, right? So what are the types of control that they can determine, and to what extent can these controls be applied? So the organization shall ensure that externally provided processes, products, and services do not adversely affect the organization's ability to consistently deliver conforming products. Basically speaking, they have to make sure that what? These external providers don't compromise their ability to what? Meet requirements. And they shall ensure the externally provided processes remain within the control of its QMS. So the organization's QMS must control those processes that are being outsourced to the external providers. They have to define that in the company. The company has to define both the controls that it intends to apply to an external provider and those it intends to apply to the resulting output. So two kinds of controls here are being referred to. First of all, I have the control to the external provider and control to the output provided by the external provider, be it a product, service, or process. C. Take into consideration these two things. A1 says what? The potential impact of the externally provided processes, products, and services on the organization's ability to consistently meet customer and applicable legal requirements. So the organization is required to what? Consider the impact of these external providers on their ability to what? Meet requirements. Right? 2. The effectiveness of the controls applied by the external provider. So now the external provider, they themselves have to now check them. So you remember, so you evaluate them, you monitor them, reevaluate them. So you have to consider the level of effectiveness of the control that the external provider already has in place. Right? Are they doing a good enough job? If not, you have to come in and teach these people how to do it, how to get this business done. And not even necessarily teach them how to get it done, but probably look for a better person who can get the job done. D. The organization shall, on here, what? Determine the verification or other activities necessary to ensure that the externally provided processes and products and services meet the requirements. So there you have it, right? So we identified two types of control here. The first one was what? Control on the external provider themselves, and also on the output that they provide to the company, be it a product, service, or process. We also talk about some of the considerations that the organization has to take, right? Some being what? The effectiveness of the controls applied by the external provider, and also the impact the external provider will have on the organization's ability to meet requirements. Good. Moving on, 8.4.3, information for external providers, right? So the organization shall ensure the adequacy of requirements prior to the communication to the external provider. So they have to make sure that there is adequate requirements before they communicate, right? So you don't go and communicate to the external provider that you need requirements A, B, and C, and then later on you come and say, oh, you have to add D, E, and F, right? Ensure that all the requirements that the external provider needs to meet is communicated to the external provider immediately or before they begin their work. Now, so the organization shall communicate to the external provider its requirements for the process product and services to be provided. So the output that they are going to be providing for you, you have to give them the requirements for that. You also have to show the requirements of what the approval of a product and services, to methods, processes, and equipment, right? So the things that you need to approve the product and the service, then the methods, processes, and equipment too. You have to check that, or you have to communicate that to the external provider. 3, you have the release of product and services, right? Before you release the product and services, you have to communicate it to the external provider as well. E, you have, if you check, some of these things were stated in 8.1. That's operational planning and control. So this is a reiteration of that, right? So most of the content of 8.1 has to be given to the external provider. Yes, the external provider. So you can do that job. C, competence, including any required qualification of persons. So requirements for competence, right? Requirements for the external providers interaction with the organization, control and monitoring of external providers performance. So see, as usual, these are the requirements that must be communicated to the to the external provider before they can do their jobs effectively. Before they can, get the job done. So they don't want to mess up. So you have to give them adequate information. So 8.5, these things are self-explanatory, and it's just a matter of you keeping your points, right? Knowing what this is about, and I think I've done that enough. So moving on, you have 8.5. 8.5 is what? Production and service provision. 8.5.1. So production and service provision, PSP, right? And then this, you have control of production and service provision. You also have what? Identification and traceability. You have property belonging to the customer or external provider. Then you have what? Preservation. You have post-delivery activities, which I mentioned earlier on in this video. Yes, what? Control of changes. Before you come to 8.6. So let's do that now. Alright, so under control of product and service, so now I'm talking about product and service provision. Now the organization is the standard or the clause. This 8.5 is just giving the organization the runaround of what they have to do in order to provide product and service. So 5.5.1 is what? Control of PSP. When I say PSP, is product and service provision. The organization shall implement PSP under controlled conditions, right? So they are before they start providing product and services, they have to have controlled conditions. That's one. Now, controlled conditions shall include as applicable. So these are the inclusions. When you say controlled, conditions, this is what you are referring to, or you can include these things as long as they are applicable to the product and service being provided. So A, the availability of documented information that defines 1, characteristics of the products to be produced, the services to be provided, or the activities to be performed. 2, the results to be achieved. Right, now the availability and so B, right, availability and use of suitable monitoring and measuring resources. We have the implementation of monitoring and measurement activities at appropriate stages to verify that criteria for control of processes or outputs. That's a lot, isn't it? So the control conditions can include what? Implementation of monitoring and measurement activities. That's an clause 7.5.1. 7.1.5. And this is a whole lot. See? So they have to implement monitoring and measurement activities which are appropriate, at their appropriate stages to make sure that the criteria for control of their processes or outputs and also the acceptance criteria for the product and services have been met. So they have to make sure that two things are met. First of all, the criteria for the control of processes or outputs, and also what the criteria for product and services, the acceptance criteria, and make sure that these two things are met. And they are met by what? Implementing monitoring and measurement activities at appropriate stages to verify those two criteria. And the use of suitable infrastructure and environment. So this is what clause 4 point is 7 point something 7.1.4 I think. Environment for operation of processes. E is what? The appointment of competent persons. 7.2 I believe. 7.2 competence. The validation and periodic revalidation of the ability to achieve planned results of processes. I think we covered this in this is very close, we covered it here. The implementation of actions to prevent human error. So these are corrective actions. And then the last one, H, is what? The implementation of release, delivery, and post-delivery activities. Releasing the product to be delivered. Delivering the product. And what? Post-delivery activities. Right, guys. So 8.5.2 now, identification and traceability. Let's see what this is about. So the organization shall again use suitable means to what? Identify outputs when it is necessary to ensure the conformity of product and service. So guys, this is one thing that we have to take note of. This one has no idea. It is always necessary. It is always necessary for it is always necessary to ensure conformity of product and services. So let's not this confuse us, right? Good. So the organization is required to use suitable means to identify outputs. But as far as I know, it's always necessary. Because the whole thing over here is about requirements, and you meeting requirements and ensuring that you are meeting the customers and legal requirements. So it's always necessary. Right. Now the organization shall identify the status of outputs with respect to monitoring and measurement requirements throughout production and service provision. So throughout the provision of production and service, the organization has to identify the status or the state of output with respect to what? The monitoring and measurement requirements. So they have to be ensuring that the outputs are meeting the monitoring and measurement requirements throughout the production and service provision. Now you just have to be checking whether the status is at par, where it's supposed to be according to the measurement. Right? So the organization shall control the unique identification of the outputs when traceability is a requirement, and shall retain the documented information necessary to enable traceability. So basically speaking, imagine in a case whereby many of the products are very similar, you will definitely need a unique way to identify them so that you can trace them, right? So this is just pointing to the fact that, basically speaking, I guess we can use logic here and say that if what I'm saying holds, that it's always necessary to make sure that the product and services are conforming to the requirement, right? Then it means that it's also always necessary to measure and monitor, those requirements. If you are measuring and monitoring those requirements, then you must find a way to what? Trace each of the products to ensure that what? They are meeting those requirements. So basically speaking, the takeaway from this was is what? The organization has to, so the first thing that they stated, or the second thing is that the organization shall identify the status of the output simply to ensure that conformance to requirements is being done. Also, they have to find a way to uniquely identify those outputs when traceability is what? A requirement, to allow them to what? Trace said output whenever it is necessary to trace it. That's basically what 8.5.2 is saying. Let me know what your thoughts are on this in the comment section. And please do subscribe if you haven't. Thank you so much for 1.29k subs now. Even though a great majority of our viewers are not subscribed, a big shout out and a big thank you from the bottom of my heart, and on behalf of the team, for you guys showing us that love. It's always appreciated and it doesn't go unnoticed, right? But guys, if you haven't subscribed, kindly hit the subscribe, share, like, comment, right? Good. So moving on now. 8.5.3 is property belonging to customers or external providers. And the organization shall exercise care with property belonging to customers or external providers while it is under the organization's control or being used by the organization. So if the organization is controlling or using the property of customers or external providers, they have to make sure that they handle it with care. Moving on, the organization shall identify, verify, protect, and safeguard this property, right? So they have to identify, verify, protect, and safeguard the property of the customers and the external providers. Good. That was it. So the property that they are using, if belongs to the customers and the external providers, they have to identify it, verify it, protect it, and safeguard it. The rest is just money. Now, when the property of a customer or external provider is lost, damaged, or otherwise found to be unsuitable for use, the organization shall report this to the customer or external provider and retain documented information on what has occurred. So basically speaking, if the property of the customer or external provider is damaged or otherwise found to be unsuitable for use, then they have to report it to the customer or the external provider first of all, and they must also document it. Document what's happening. Good. So note, a customer or external provider's property can include material component, tools, and equipment. Is that premises, intellectual property, and personal data. So these are the types or examples of property belonging to the customer or the external provider. 8.5.4, that's preservation, right? An organization shall preserve the outputs during production and service provision to the extent necessary to ensure conformity to the requirement. That's quite simple, isn't it? You have to make sure that they are required to present the outputs during production and service provision to the extent necessary in order to ensure conformity to requirements. In order to ensure that requirements are met. Note: preservation can include identification, handling, contamination, control, packaging, storage, transmission or transportation, and protection. I don't know where contamination is there, but it's there. I don't know where the standard people, but it's there. So these are the means of preservation, I should say. 8.5.5 post-delivery activities. Long awaited. We mentioned this at the beginning of the video, and now we talk about it, right? So the organization shall meet requirements for the post-delivery activities associated with the product and services in determining the extent of post-delivery activities that are required. The organization shall consider a legal requirement, B, the potential undesired consequences associated with its product and services, C, the nature, use, and unintended lifetime of its products and services, customer requirements, and customer feedback, right? What are we saying here? Under post-delivery activities, the organization is what? Required to meet requirements for post-delivery activities connected with the product and services that they are offering to the customer. Now, when they are determining the extent of post-delivery activities, the post-delivery activities that are required, they have to consider these things: legal requirements, right? The potential or possible undesired consequences associated with their products and services, right? So those undesired consequences that can come from their products and services, have to consider it and structure or determine the post-delivery activities that they have to undertake. And the nature, use, and intended lifetime of its product and services, requirements and feedback from the customers, right? Note: post-delivery activities can include actions under warranty conditions, contractual obligations such as what? Maintenance services and supplementary services such as what? Recycling or final disposal. Right, there you have it. 8.5.5 post-delivery activities. Almost at the finish line. Let's get out in, right? So control of changes. Now the organization shall review and control changes for production or service provision to the extent necessary to ensure continuing conformity with requirements. Right. So see, so I tell the organization. So how do they control changes? Right. The organization is required to review and control changes for the production or service provision to the extent necessary. So they are required under the clause to review and control changes for PS or as well as for production or service provision to the extent necessary in order to ensure the continued conformity to requirements. Now, the organization shall retain documented information describing the results of the review of changes, right? The review that they conduct, the persons authorizing the change, and any necessary actions arising from the review. That's pretty simple, right? Good. So 8.6 is what? The release of products and services. Now this is probably the shortest subclause in 8, as it stands on its own. There are no subclauses. So we'll touch on this and 8.7 and we come up from our break. Right, so 8.6, right, the release of products and services. The organization shall implement planned arrangements at appropriate stages to verify that the product and service requirements have been met, right? So release of product and services. Like they are releasing the product and services, right, to the customers. And as well, under this, the organization is required to implement planned arrangements at appropriate stages to verify the product and service requirements have been met. Right now, the release of product and services to the customer shall not proceed until planned arrangements have been satisfactorily satisfactorily met, satisfactorily completed, unless otherwise approved by a relevant authority as applicable by the customer. Right. So they are before they release the product and services, the requirements must be met. Right. And until those requirements are met, they shall not proceed with the release. And this, those requirements are approved by what? A relevant authority as applicable by the customer. Right. Now the organization shall retain, as usual, documented information on the release of product and services. The documented information shall include 1. Evidence of conformity with acceptance criteria and traceability of the persons authorizing the release. Good point here. So basically speaking, before the product and services are released, they have to be approved, or they have to be approved by a relevant authority, and that authority, the approval comes from the product and services meeting the requirements satisfactorily. Right. Now they also have to keep documentation about 2 things: evidence of conformity with the acceptance criteria and the traceability to the person or persons authorizing the release. Right. So 8.7, right, control of non-conforming output. So what do we mean by non-conforming output? Right. So a non-conforming output just refers to those outputs that don't meet the requirements, don't meet the data requirements or the customer requirements. But then, so let's enough talking. Let's see what the standard says. So there are 2 subclasses, right? You have 8.7.1 and there's 8.7.2. Now 8.7.1 is what? The organization shall ensure that outputs that do not conform to their requirements are identified and controlled to prevent their unintended use or delivery. What do we have here? Good. So the organization is required to make sure that the outputs that don't conform to the requirements are identified and controlled. So they have to identify and control those non-conforming outputs to prevent their unintended use or delivery. Right? To make sure that nobody uses them, right? Or even that they're not even delivered to the customer in the first place. Right? So if you don't use them, you don't deliver them, because they don't conform to the standard. Right? They are not quality. Now the organization shall take appropriate action based on the nature of the non-conformity and its effect on the conformity of product and services. This shall also apply. Well, so as and when they realize that some of the outputs are not conforming, they are required to take appropriate action based on the nature of the non-conformity and the effect it has on the conformity of product and services. Now, this shall also apply to non-conforming products and services detected after delivery of products, during or after the provision of services. So this is to set out, regardless of whether or not it has been delivered or not, whether before delivery or after delivery. Once the non-conformance is discovered, actions must be taken, based on the nature of that non-conformity to prevent it from happening in the future. So you take a corrective action. So the organization shall deal with non-conforming outputs in one or more of the following ways. Correction means what? to restore it to the way it should be, right? So changing right from wrong, changing wrong to right. Good. Example. If I say 2 plus 2 is equal to 3, that's wrong. Me making a correction is what? 2 plus 2 is equal to what? 4. That's right. B. Segregation, containment, return or suspension of provision of products and services. That's fairly self-explanatory. C. Informing the customer. D. Obtaining authorization for acceptance under concession. Right? Good. And it says that conformity to requirements shall be verified when non-conforming outputs are corrected. So after you make the correction, you verify if now they are meeting the standard before you take any next step. Good. So 8.7.2 says what? The organization shall retain documented information that A. describes the non-conformity, B. describes the actions taken, C. describes any concessions obtained, and D. identifies the authority and deciding action in respect of non-conformity. Right, there you have it. So I just want to draw our attention to this. I did it again. So sorry guys. The 8.7.2 I didn't turn. So you can see it. So this is the, but even that aside, I want to draw our attention to this. The D, right? Obtaining authorization for acceptance under concession. So what's the meaning of concession? Right. So for 1990, it says concession, a thing that is granted, especially in response to demands. So it's like a compromise or an adjustment or a modification or an exception. So it seems that C says what D says obtaining authorization for acceptance under consent. So maybe I think with that scenario, perhaps the non-conformity is not so major, maybe it's minor. So you get the authorization so that it's accepted under what? Concession, right? That's what I think granted, especially in response to what? Demands. Good. So as I was saying, now we come to 8.7.2, and that let's talk about the organization being required to retain certain documented information. So the documented information that describes the non-conformity, the actions taken, any concessions obtained, any compromises obtained, or any exceptions, right, or allowances, and also those documented information that identify the authority deciding the action in respect of the non-conformity, right? Those documents should be those documented information should be retained, right? Thank you so much for watching. This is the Haven Project. You're watching THP tutorials. These are here once again the word said. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, make sure to hit the subscribe button and prepare for more videos like this one. Thank you. I'll see you in the next video.